Victoria Durer. I prefer to be called Tori. I am formally, my kind of background is a formal arts practitioner. I used to be the youth arts coordinator for South Dublin County Council back from 2008 to 2013. And then I went to Queen's University in Belfast, where I was a senior lecturer in arts management and cultural policy, running the program in arts management there. And now I am a cultural policy research fellow or something like that at UCD now. So I started just before lockdown in UCD with some lovely colleagues. So I am here today to hopefully facilitate a conversation in the time that we have. And I'm working with Anthony Schrag at Queen Margaret University and Rebecca Finkel at Queen Margaret University, both of which are not here for different reasons, and they are sad not to be here, and so am I. So we're also working with Devon Arts Project in Huntly, Scotland. We're working with colleague Bernadine, who some of you may have already seen here at the conference, from the Irish Architecture Foundation. We're working with Rosie Leonard, who's a freelance artist, Jamie Sutherland at Summerhall in Edinburgh. And Dunleary Arts Office, Moira Davey, has been working with us. And we are just kind of Irish and Scottish-based people. Like Rita, I am someone who is of many places. And we're using place-based workshops to explore the issue of sustainable prosperity and how we might work in a more embracing way of that. And I'll explain what that very complicated term, or I'll explain the extent of my knowledge and understanding of that term in a minute. So I'm going to introduce the context of that project and hopefully bring us together in conversation on it. And we are supported to do so by the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So it's really very early days, light workshops, lots of questions, not many answers. So I hope you're willing to join me on that journey. So am I going the right way? Yeah. So it was great that Siobhan mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals in the last session. So September 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the member states of the United Nations, and they took effect in 2016. I feel very teachery up here at this moment. These goals followed the earlier Millennium Development Goals as an evaluative standard and technical framework for concerted government action towards global development. There is a reason I'm taking you through these kind of lecture-y slides. So key points were the adjustment from development to sustainable development, signaling a shift in objectives towards sustainability and a shift in scope from developing countries, as we had once called them, to all kind of countries. So the Act puts sustainability at the center of global political debate, policy, and programs for years to come, and it still is. And in this context, sustainability is not simply defined as one easy-to-reach goal, but as a complex set of visions for the future of humanity. And the definition, sustainable development, has been defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, calls for concerted efforts towards building an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future for people. For it to be achieved, it's crucial to harmonize three core elements: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. We're going to continue to eradicate poverty in all of its forms, and we must do so equitably, creating greater opportunities for all, reducing inequalities, raising basic standards of living, fostering equitable social development and inclusion, and promoting integrated and sustainable management of natural resources and ecosystems. And I read that just to remind us of the task that we have been set and that we have set ourselves. So it encompasses things that intertwine environmental health, vibrancy, biodiversity, equity, inclusivity, individual opportunity, as well as the collective well-being, and capability and development, and a sense of global citizenship. So the notion that the local matters, it cannot matter without global interdependency. And I think that we did see that in the pandemic, and I'll come back to that in a minute. To go back to the sustainable development, my little drawing isn't there. So the third bullet point should be circled there. Because what sustainable development goals do is they also place emphasis on growth. And that's what I'm kind of questioning with this project with my colleagues. And the Centre for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity, which is based in the University of Glasgow, is really at the heart of a lot of these questions. And they're questioning the approach that emphasizes and the type of emphasis on growth that we've been taking. And if we had no more economic growth, what would things look like? So what does it mean to question growth? So we tend to talk about economics as isolated from society and environment. So just to kind of highlight, so American economist Kenneth Boulding in 1973, anyone who believes that exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. And environmentalist Edward Abbey in 77, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell. And then more recently, of course, Greta. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? So Tim Jackson, who's kind of the key scholar behind the Center for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity, talks about we've created a system that privileges one narrow view of human success, achieving more, having more stuff. George Carlin's skit on that is something I often think of. But he really questions this idea of the measure by which we kind of place ourselves and having more and growing more. And I think this is really poignant in relation to thinking things that happened in the first session today in Valerie and reusing the spaces around our towns. There are tensions in our values system, and I think we kind of all know this in many ways. And values are the things that are deemed important, and they determine our priority. And sustainability really boils down to cultivating and aligning values, beliefs, and behaviors with environmental stewardship and social responsibility. So we can choose to either support or undermine the planet, us as people, one another, and prosperity. And these tensions, kind of value tensions, aren't new. They also came up this morning. Public sector kind of tensions between efficiency and effectiveness do not go with democratic processes. They are not efficient processes, right? They breed conflict in order to find and hope for consensus. So we're good in some ways at dealing with value tensions, but it's how we kind of work through them. And I just thought this was a really interesting example. I don't know if any of you know about this site. I'm probably going to say it wrong, Ecosia. It's a search engine where instead of giving Google all your data, you're helping to plant a tree. So it's just different ways of thinking what we do and what we prioritize. So what is sustainable prosperity? Good question. It means living well with less material consumption. It means respecting the finite resources of the planet. It means thinking about what does it mean to live well and be prosperous, and to rethink the emphasis on the economic as the measure of what it is to live well. It causes us to focus on a vision that brings together economic, environmental, and socio-cultural health. It places financial progress. The aim is to place financial progress in a larger balance with environmental stewardship, public health, social well-being, equity, happiness, and just really kind of rethink where we emphasize our value. Rebecca Finkel was kind of talking about how everybody says that they want to be sustainable, but in reality we aren't. A lot of other scholars talk about the way that even the privilege to talk about being sustainable or green is a middle-class privilege in many ways. It's also a place-based privilege. Who has the services to kind of deal with being on public transport, to recycle the things in their house, where the collection bins, this kind of thing. These are all place and economically determined in many ways. In the sector, we are always doing more with less. We're always just, we're adaptive and resilient, and we're still doing everything we've always done as everything shrinks around us. And it's about really rethinking that. So what we all, Anthony and Rebecca and I and the amazing colleagues that we've been able to work with in the sector in this kind of initial exploration, we're thinking about the pandemic and how it was a jumping off point in approaching the complexity of sustainable prosperity and trying to get our heads around it, I suppose. And we took it in the way of Our experience over the last 2 years, and as they continue, have placed limits of the pandemic, have placed limits on us. It limited our social interaction, it limited our international travel, it limited our economic growth, it changed our work and leisure, but it exposed us to dependencies and it exposed us to vulnerabilities. Some of us already knew the great inequity that many of us were experiencing. Some of us discovered it anew. We all know about the arts sector, how it halted in-person events, it facilitated the closure of some arts organizations, sudden job losses exacerbated an already precarious sector and the inequality that's existing within that. We shifted local and global engagement to our homes and within and with people in our homes, and we engaged online. So we were able to broaden audiences in some ways through that, but a lot of people were excluded as well. And again, that place-based exclusion and lack of service became really visual, more so to maybe others that didn't know about it. And I think Siobhan kind of touched on that in the last session. And the importance of the arts for kind of connection. If you look at it kind of environmental, a lot of environmental scholars went, yay, the pandemic's shown us what we can do without. But it really what it did was it showed the fallibility of a growth-dependent economic model and what living locally but with greater awareness of our global interdependence might be, because we still needed Zoom, we still needed to be online. And the colleagues from Huntley talked about how much they learned through international colleagues. So we're not letting go of the global. We still need it. So we just really thought about what might we do, what might we rethink differently. And so we've taken a place-based approach to this and thinking about how this, to seize the opportunity out of something that's been quite tragic. And as we look to kind of arts and different forms of recovery and the emphasis on towns and things, how can we be more ethical in our approach and how can we think about that within our own sector? We've been talking with people in Edinburgh, based at Summer Hall, as it was kind of one initial place example. The urban periphery, we've been working with colleagues in Ballyogan, with the Irish colleagues I already mentioned, and then the rural Huntly Deveron projects. And we've met 3 times with our goal to kind of just think more about the concepts, feed this into practice, feed it into our teaching. We all teach on different kind of arts and festivals and cultural policy courses, and just look for ways to collaborate and develop further study and exploration. So before I'm going to ask us to collectively explore some of the limits that we experienced and our places experienced in the pandemic and think about what that might mean for thinking about what we can do, not more within limits, but what we can rethink as a result of those limits. I'll just introduce some feedback from colleagues in Deveron, and just to give you a little bit more about them since they're not here to speak about themselves. It's based in Huntly in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. They're in an 18th century rural town. For over 25 years, their town has been the venue. So they have artist residencies and different programs where they inhabit, explore, map, and activate Huntly with people in Huntly and that live in Huntly through kind of artist-led projects. A lot of their work takes on and is based initially on kind of social exploration, like fatherhood, spirituality, migration, what it means to live locally. And then, they have public gatherings, film screenings, and this kind of thing. And so my colleague, Anthony Schrag, asked them to reflect on the complexity of this term and their practice. And there is a video of this. Yeah, cue video.
I'm Robin Woolsey, a producer at Devon Project. I'm Jeff, the arts and community worker at Devon Project. I would say the way I understand sustainable prosperity, in very, very simple terms, is doing more with less. Doing less with more. we're so used to saying it the other way around, and that is exactly the conversation that we've been having about sustainable prosperity, especially with our funders based in our application. So.
Yeah, and I sort of think of it in terms of degrowth. I mean, very similar, but degrowth is sort of, I guess, the buzzword that we've used in conversations when we're thinking about how we work together, how our organisation works, and how we work with the people that come in and out of the organisation too.
I would say communicating what we do, how we work with artists, and the way that we want to continue working, things like degrowth, these are topics that we need to make sure everybody understands, and sometimes that's quite difficult to get a kind of baseline of understanding with all the variety of funders, and we work with wind farm trusts and local authority and community groups and all kinds of things like that. So it's not just art-focused funding. So that's one element.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not sure whether it's exactly specific to the rural, but I think it's so easy to fall into a hole of trying to be everything for everyone. Perhaps because of the lack of understanding of what we do, expectancy to put bins out or to do all the things that maybe like the authorities are sort of not doing. So I think that's what's trying to happen.
Thank you. Okay, so what I thought we might do is we have about 30 minutes. So I'm actually going to ask you, because there's a pretty good number in the room. I feel very overwhelmed, actually. To ask you to kind of turn to a couple of people next to you and just explore these questions. What? Is that not okay? Because we're, what? What does that mean? Keep going, okay. I don't do well with obviously I wasn't a baseball player in the States. So you explore these questions together yourselves, and then we'll come back and share kind of the things that you've heard amongst yourselves, so nobody feels too much kind of specific pressure to speak. But when you're speaking to each other, if you might think as well at the top of these questions about the place that you're thinking from. So you heard from colleagues that were reflecting on the rural, and a lot of what's come up was when we went to Huntly was the constant limits that people that work and live in the rural feel they're under already anyway, in relation to, say, what's available in urban areas. And how that place that you're talking from or thinking from relates to some of these questions. So the questions are: considering the pandemic and the experience of lockdown, what did we learn about ourselves, or if you want to speak from your organization, capacity and capability for working within limits? So capability might be related to staff, resources, online, access to materials, whatever they might be for you. Drawing on examples from whichever kind of area you're most comfortable, your sector, your life, your practice, what do you think lends itself to the notion of kind of living within limits, but living well within limits? What issues arose that showed challenges to the potential? So we've talked a lot about today, and I wasn't privileged enough to be here yesterday, but we talked a lot today about kind of collective effort, but also kind of isolation as well in some ways. So, think about those challenges and those real inequities as well when you're reflecting on this. And then what we'll do is we'll come back and talk together. And then I have some kind of initial things that are cropping up for us that I'll share in the kind of the last 5 minutes from the 3 different places that we've been. We just were in Ballyogan yesterday, actually. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to give you I'll check back on you in 10 minutes and see how you're doing. Okay? I hate to kind of stop the conversation, but I'm gonna. I don't, unless you feel the need to, you can keep your chairs where they are, I think, because we're out of here at 1:15 anyway, and I promised I'd help them move them back. I eavesdropped a little bit, and so I thought what we might do is essentially what a workshop kind of facilitation fund lets you do is just think and wonder. And what essentially thinking about sustainable prosperity in our sector or for our local sectors, it's about a systems change. So it's really big and overwhelming. But just some of you talk, some of the things, bye Rita, some of the things I overheard were, what we learned about having artists in our venue to allow artists to use the space would be, if we did that kind of, if we did more of that in that way, it would be, it's got you thinking about breaking, hundreds of years of model of the way a venue might work or a theater venue might work. How the pandemic, we couldn't produce in the same way, so we had to think and we had to reflect, or we always do that, but we were given different kinds of space. So if I also think about a spatial plan, I also think about the expanse of space. And that we got the expanse of space to think and reflect, and we got permission to not produce. And I've done a lot of research in dance, and Rita mentioned one of the projects we're going to be doing, but producing, having to always produce something, there's a lot of pressure for that in a lot of our funding. And so another group was talking about, reorientating our funding to allow for slow burn and reflection time. What else did I hear? Our relationship to the natural world was redefined. I remember at the beginning everyone was like, the birds, especially those of us in Dublin, being very Dublin-centered, the birds, the birds. Is there anything else that people want to share about, rural people were probably like, I always hear the birds. They hear the play stories. Is there anything anybody wants to share that came up for them about kind of the ethics of our system, without putting it on any one organization or person, just kind of the ethical framework around, yeah. Another group, to kind of hit back at you horribly, another group was talking about how we got all this time to slow, but now it feels like we're ramping back up to where we were to catch up with the fact that we haven't done anything or feel like we haven't done anything. Yeah, Mary. Yeah, I was going to take you very briefly, I'm aware of the time, I've got 2 minutes, to take us through some of the things that have emerged from what we've learned. And one was that capability for change differs amongst practitioners, so groups of people and localities. So it's reflective of kind of broader socioeconomic and political circumstances, but who can work from home? Can you dance from home? Pushing and pulling and material and furniture around the house, who has outdoor space. So we were all very, just go out into your garden. Not all of us had them. What type of caring responsibilities people had and how those caring responsibilities shifted during the pandemic. One locality contains multiple layers of communities. So who is the we in our local places, and can we actually speak for all of them? So I thought Tom's point about kind of angry constituents and things like that is very real. Whose perception of right? Bernardine from the Irish Architecture Foundation, talking about the Workers' Villages, a project I think just Creative Ireland supported through Reimagine. Ross comment, the kind of distress or stigma of a total change in a kind of way of life and a way of working. And thinking about the industry there, that's no longer nice or good for the climate. So that's wrong. What you've been doing historically for years in a place is now wrong. It's not good for everybody. And kind of thinking about whose perception and how do you bring people through thinking about that. Multiple forms of knowledge and ways of learning were experienced and encountered. Embodied knowledge of labor, how we feel our work in our body and how that changed, or how we became more aware of that in the pandemic. Not moving. There's a saying about, people's backsides growing quite a bit when they were in the pandemic from not moving, not making that effort to go to work, and the hunching over and things that happened for people there. Affect and care is something which we've become newly different in how we care for one another in our sector, as well as those in our family or our friends or our neighbors. Am I on the right side? And then again, along with the kind of workers' villages comment, the local histories, how they're perceived, told, and experienced differently. Whether or not a place needs this or that is of a particular perspective. And I think that's been touched on already. And then what also became apparent through kind of talking to the different places was the importance of the national and the local and the alignment around that. So a bookshop in Huntly couldn't work without support from a kind of internationally recognized author, James Patterson, kind of fund, and HarperCollins to make something that was, kind of very collectively based bookshop kind of run. So the importance of the networks that go beyond the local and how that became more apparent, or differently apparent, I'd say, during the pandemic. So again, leaving you with no answers, just like us academics like to do. But just to say, as someone that comes from practice, we will be searching for them. But I do encourage you to look at our website, but also look at the CUSP website. And there's a lot of really interesting videos that explain and take you through the complexity of this term that I'm still kind of working through myself. So I come from a very honest place of learning, and I thank you for helping me think through this more, and I hope I've just sparked a bit of seed, and if you'd like to talk about it more, please come and talk to me, and maybe we can connect on it. But enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you at lunch.